Crypto Caesar, Caesar Capital. Hope you're well. It's the 18th of September, not December, 18th of September 2024. I hope you're well. First thing off the bat, this video is brought to you by Prime XBT Exchange. If you're interested in leveraged trading, then please check out the link in the description. You can get up to 20% deposit bonus on your first time deposit. There are only 10 available, so get them whilst you can, but it's a pretty good offer. It's 20% on your deposit up to 7,000 USDT. So it's a really, really good offer. Once the 10 spots go, it goes down to 7%, but still that's a pretty good offer. As I said, link in the description, and please manage your risk accordingly. Okay, so here we are. I haven't done a video now for I think 2 months, and there's a good reason for that. Q3 is usually a little bit boring. I did write an article sort of arguing the potential case for a bullish Q3. We didn't really, or a summer rally at least. I mean, we got up to sort of 69K during the summer, but we certainly didn't have a summer rally. And generally speaking, Q3 or quarter three, financial quarter three, is usually quite boring for Bitcoin. However, quarter four, financial quarter four after a halving is mainly bullish, and I'm expecting a bit of upside to Bitcoin during Q4, probably a significant amount of upside, I would have thought. But let's think about where we're going with this video first. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of look at Bitcoin generally, and then we're going to look at the 4-year cycle. And then we're going to go on to Bitcoin dominance, consider the altcoin market, and then look at the total market cap of crypto, and then we'll finish. So it's probably going to be about a 20-minute, half an hour video. So get a cup of tea and let's start. So Bitcoin in general, Bitcoin's looking pretty good. It's carving out this lovely classical charting pattern of a cup and handle. You can obviously see how it's formed this cup on the weekly chart, and now it's just carving out this handle. I mean, essentially, Bitcoin has been consolidating through the entirety of quarter three, which so far is about 189 days or 27 weeks. So pretty much all of quarter three, Bitcoin has just been consolidating, which is not unusual for Bitcoin in quarter threes. But as I said a moment ago, I'm suspecting a much more bullish Q4. Now, sort of around, February, March time, we were having to consider, and quite properly in my view, the real possibility of there being a left translated cycle. And not the usual 4-year cycle for Bitcoin. And there was a good reason for that, as I said, because, we had all the ETFs coming in. It was very, very bullish at that point. And Bitcoin rallied up just a little bit above its all-time high, but then began to consolidate. So I think it's fair to say now that the likelihood of a left translated cycle is very, very unlikely indeed. And we are likely now, in my view, to continue to follow the 4-year cycle. But the interesting thing about the 4-year cycle, which we'll come into the moment, is that generally speaking, Bitcoin doesn't surpass its all-time high prior to the midpoint. And let's take a look at the chart with Bitcoin. So this is the 4-year cycle, and essentially, this is all of the data since the inception, really, of Bitcoin on the BLX chart, or at least the traded inception of Bitcoin price history. And as you can see in this chart, these are the cycles, and essentially a cycle is measured from low to low. And what you'll quickly find is from each one of these lows to the next low is about 4 years. And that's why people call it the 4-year cycle. It hasn't really got anything to do with the halving. It's more to do with where the lows come in on the chart. Because you can see here, there's a low in January 15, then there's a low in sort of end of December, sort of mid to end of December 18. 4 years later, then there was another low end of November, beginning of December 2022. another 4 years. So you can see how the 4-year cycle works. It goes from one low to the next low. And essentially, cycles are best measured from their lows, because essentially one cycle ends at the low and another cycle is reborn, you see. So this is the first Bitcoin cycle, where it found its peak at about $1,000. Then it came down to its low, its first 4-year cycle low in January 15. This was the second cycle of Bitcoin, where it rallied up to just shy of 20,000 US dollars. Then it found its ultimate low in around December 2018, obviously 4 years later from the last low. And then this was the third cycle, which I'm sure many of you were probably involved in, where Bitcoin rallied from its ultimate low of about $3,000 up to its ultimate high of around $69,000, then finding its low 4 years after the previous low, around about sort of the November, December time of 2022. So you can see here quite clearly the way that the cycles work. And, to be quite frank, in my view, it's best to work with this cycle until we can't work with it, because as it stands, this cycle has worked pretty well. And if you had used this cycle to make decisions or position trades based on this cycle, you would have done pretty well. But back to the midpoint. So the midpoint of a cycle is essentially pretty much what it says on the tin. It's the halfway point of the cycle. Now, we know that Bitcoin so far has worked in these kind of 4-year cycles. The midpoint is the 2-year point of which the cycle is in. So we've got the low, then the midpoint, then the low, then the midpoint and the low, etc. So essentially the midpoint is measuring pretty much 2 years from the previous low, or 2 years into the new cycle, if that makes sense. We're on the second cycle here. This was the ultimate low, the rebirth of the second cycle. So the ultimate low of the first cycle, the rebirth of the second cycle at the low, then the midpoint, then the low, then the midpoint. Now, what's interesting about midpoint is that Bitcoin has previously, historically, always, or has never rather, surpassed its previous all-time high prior to the midpoint. So if we take a look at this, so we can see this was Bitcoin's first high coming out here. Then it came down, then it came up at the midpoint, and that is where essentially Bitcoin started to attack this high. Then it continued then on to make its ultimate high, then its low in the first cycle. Then, of course, we had the low. Then Bitcoin, came out. It was grinding its way out of the low for some time. This is the 2016 cycle. And then it started to attack its previous all-time high at the midpoint of the cycle. So you can see the previous high here. You can see the midpoint here. And you can see where the price is attacking that midpoint area. Then we had the third cycle, the midpoint around about the end of November, beginning of December 2020, the previous high being about $20,000. And at the midpoint, this is when Bitcoin started to come towards, or attack, as it were, or peck away at its previous all-time high of 20K, right at the midpoint. Then we have our midpoint here, which is the 25th of November or thereabouts, depending on how you measure it. I mean, it's probably best to give it quite a wide berth of probably, the latter part of October through to December. But I'm sure you get the point that essentially what Bitcoin does is, historically, it has always kind of attacked its previous all-time high around about the midpoint of the cycle. So if we go back to our charts that we started off with a moment ago, this nice cup and handle pattern, the reason why we thought that there could potentially be a left translated cycle was because Bitcoin was starting to attack its previous all-time high way before the midpoint, right? So this was its previous all-time high. Bitcoin found its ultimate low here, came up, rallied up right up to essentially its previous all-time high. Then it started to consolidate. And the reason why a lot of people thought, and me included, because you can't ignore something that's staring you in the face. The reason why we thought that potentially it could be a left translated cycle, i.e., not topping out in 2025, so topping out in 2024 probably, was because Bitcoin had surpassed its previous all-time high prior to the midpoint. But actually, when you look at it on a line chart, what Bitcoin's actually done is it's come up and it's just been tapping away and making closures below the all-time high for quite a considerable amount of time. So whilst it did surpass its all-time high on a bar chart, it didn't really surpass its all-time high on a line chart. So it was kind of like tapping away or coming up to it, but not quite breaking through it. So this says to me that, you know, the likelihood is that we are in a long consolidation phase, which we're probably coming to the end of. And Bitcoin is just essentially getting the fuel it needs to begin to continue its 4-year cycle. So going back to the other chart, the likelihood I see, based on, you know, the seasonality of Bitcoin, the fact that Q4s are always pretty good for Bitcoin after a halving, and the fact that it seems to me that we are now continuing to follow the 4-year cycle, I would say that there would be it's a strong likelihood that this sort of thing is going to happen here. So we're going to consolidate for a little bit longer, probably through September, because September's a bit of a crappy month. And then by the time we reach the midpoint, and we're going to give it a wide berth of, you know, between end of October through to sort of mid-December, I would suspect around that time that Bitcoin will be either close to its all-time high or above it. So a bit of a wide berth, obviously, because, you know, cycles aren't an exact science. You can't, you know, predict exactly what's going to happen. But based on Q4 after a halving being generally a bullish financial quarter for Bitcoin, based on the fact now it seems that we are following a 4-year cycle until we're not, and based on the fact that Bitcoin doesn't generally start to attack and surpass its all-time high until a midpoint of a cycle, I would say that there is a fairly strong likelihood that Bitcoin will be, you know, following this kind of way, this pattern of coming up maybe into October, close to its all-time high, maybe a little bit of a pullback in November, and then, you know, come sort of November, December time, Bitcoin then starts to surpass its all-time high and make higher highs. And we then start the mania phase of the cycle. And of course, the mania phase is when Bitcoin surpasses its all-time high and doesn't look back, and then goes to make its ultimate high. Now, looking at Bitcoin dominance, this is something which, for some reason or another, I don't understand why, but people, despite the amount of videos I've done on this and the amount of videos other people have done on this, I think one other person into the cryptoverse, Ben Cohen, has done quite a few videos on this. I think we're probably the only two people who really talk about it and understand it. But for whatever reason, lots of people don't understand Bitcoin dominance. I'm going to do another video. My next video will just be on Bitcoin dominance and the altcoin rally. But essentially, Bitcoin dominance just measures the dominance of Bitcoin over the market. And what happens in cycles is that when Bitcoin dominance gets to its peak and then starts to roll over and move downwards, that's when the altcoins start to rally. Because at the beginning of a cycle, everybody's still a little bit worried. No one wants to take too much risk. You know, they prefer to be in Bitcoin. But once Bitcoin then starts to surpass its all-time high, we're close to it, you know, a lot of risk essentially comes back into the market. People are more confident in the market and they are willing to take on more risk, hence buying altcoins, and thus bringing the dominance of Bitcoin down. So what we could see here in this chart very, very quickly was this was Bitcoin dominance back in November 2016. It was 97%, right? Now, this was just the beginning of what some of us experienced as probably one of the craziest alt seasons there will ever be. I think in the crypto market, it was an insane time to be in crypto. And this was the Bitcoin dominance at that point, about 96, 97%. So it was hugely high. Then when Bitcoin started to surpass its all-time high and rally, Bitcoin dominance then started to drop off a cliff. And this is when the altcoins started to rally, when Bitcoin dominance was dropping. Okay. And essentially the euphoric top was around about January 2018, where Bitcoin dominance was what was it, about 35%, so pretty low, right? Then we had the beginning of the bear market. Then we got over the bear market in December 2020. Bitcoin started to surpass its all-time high. Bitcoin dominance peaked out at 73%. Then it started its trajectory to the downside, and that's when the altcoin market started to really, really rally. Most of the good altcoins outperformed Bitcoin. And then, arguably the top for most altcoins in 2021 was around about April, May, although some other altcoins like Ethereum and Solana, etc., went on to make further highs with Bitcoin when Bitcoin topped out in November 2022. But generally speaking, and arguably, April, May 2021 was where most altcoins had topped out, and that was the end of that for them. But Bitcoin dominance at that point was at 40%, right? And then it found its ultimate low around about 38%. And we've been through our bear market that we went through, and I spoke about this a lot. I have done for the last 18 months or so. This chart is probably 2 or 3 years old. But I was saying to everybody around here that, Bitcoin dominance is going to 58, 60%. A lot of people didn't like that. A lot of people have been calling alt seasons all the way along through this sort of grind to the upside, and they were completely wrong. And it was obvious to me that if we were certainly to follow the 4-year cycle, that Bitcoin dominance was going to be, topping out around about the 58, 60% mark, or at least it would top out when we got there. And it's pretty obvious because we've got this kind of area of support, which is going to be now resistance. And here we are. Bitcoin dominance is at 58.45%. So many people said I was wrong about this, but clearly I wasn't. But this is where I think that the market is going to turn. It could take another month, it could take another 2 months or so, but I suspect by November, December of 2024, Bitcoin dominance will top out around about here. Whether it's 58%, whether it's 60%, I suspect it will top out around about there, and then it will start its move down. Okay, and the closer it gets to this kind of area of between sort of say 43% and 38%, the closer it gets to that area, the more caution I personally will exercise in my positions across the board, because once Bitcoin dominance gets down closer into this range, close to it or in it, we call it the death zone, because this really is where Bitcoin and altcoins have historically always topped out in the past. Okay, so there will be, in my view, a very, very strong likelihood once Bitcoin dominance gets close to or into this area, that's going to be a top signal, one of many top signals that you can use. But I'll do another video on this so we can go into it in some more detail. But essentially, I hope you get the point. So conclusion on altcoins is we are very close, in my view, for altcoins to start outperforming Bitcoin. And, if I had a gun to my head, I would say that that process will begin in November / December this year, but will then continue into Q1 and Q2 next year, maybe into Q3, where Bitcoin dominance will ultimately break down. There is an argument, of course, that we now have, ETFs, etc., buying lots of Bitcoin. But, I think there are going to be altcoin ETFs, and it wouldn't surprise me by Q1 next year that there's a Solana ETF, for example, and that would mean there would be Ethereum ETF, a Solana ETF, etc. So, whilst I understand the ETFs might have a bit of a sort of, might have an effect, as it were, on Bitcoin dominance. Ultimately, I don't think they will that much. And ultimately, I think that Bitcoin dominance is going to drop and some of the altcoins will certainly outperform Bitcoin. Right. Finally, let's take a look at the total market cap of crypto. So this is just called crypto total market cap. So it's the total market cap of everything, the top 100 shitcoins, Ethereum, Bitcoin, Solana, the lot. Okay. Now, this is quite an interesting chart because we've got the data we have goes back to March 2014. So it's quite, or actually, yeah, March 2014. So there's a fair amount of data. I mean, anyone in traditional finance will say that's no data at all, which is acceptable. But in crypto, this is a lot of data. Okay, this is actually quite a lot of data in crypto. So. But the interesting thing about this chart is if we take the ultimate low here, then the ultimate high, then the next ultimate low, which is here, and use a trend-based Fibonacci extension, you will see that Bitcoin, the total market cap, topped out at the 3618 at about 2.9 trillion last cycle. So let's just draw that so you can see how it worked. Fib extensions, trend-based Fib extensions are slightly different to Fib extensions, but they are very good at getting a general idea of where things might be going on a where the bulls are looking for certain targets. Just gives you a general base of the trend. So there are three anchor points. The first anchor point is an ultimate low. The second anchor point is the high. Then your third anchor point is the low in the cycle. So this is our first low, first anchor point, second anchor point, the high. Then you bring it down to your ultimate low, which is your third anchor point. And that gives you, your extension. Now, I've only got the 3618 here, but you could, add other fibs to it. But interestingly enough, the total market cap reached 3.618 trillion, which was, sorry, the market cap reached 2.9 trillion, which was the 3618 Fibonacci extension. Now, if we were to draw a Fib extension from the ultimate low of that cycle to the ultimate high of the next cycle to the ultimate low that we experienced back in 2022, we got two readings here. I decided to go with two because I think we've got to take into account diminishing returns. But then, there is an argument that we don't need to take into account diminishing returns, but it's better to be conservative. So I've taken into account diminishing returns, and I've got the 2618 and 3618. So if we were to equal the last move or last cycle move of the total market cap and reach the 3618, we would get to about 11.5 trillion total market cap, which I think is probably a little bit too high, to be honest. But if we were to reach the 2618, we would reach about 8.5 trillion total market cap. Now, interestingly enough, if we measure this nice cup and handle, because this is again a nice cup and handle pattern, and it looks very similar, does it not, to the price structure of Bitcoin. This is the cup, and the way you measure a cup and handle is by measuring from the top of the cup down to the bottom of the cup, okay, and then taking that out to the breakout point, which would be about there, and that would take us to about 9.5 trillion. Okay, so that would mean that if this sort of pattern plays out, which, there is a sort of strong likelihood that it might, then we are looking at a market cap of around about 9.5 trillion, which is obviously quite a lot. But then when you think of it in the grand scheme of things, this is all of crypto during an institutional bull market. I think that that's actually quite sort of doable. Okay. And it's also a technical target of a cup and handle. Now, if we take that amount of 9.5 trillion, and we look at what the dominance of Bitcoin might be at that point. So going back to our Bitcoin dominance chart, let's say, for example, the Bitcoin dominance comes down to 40%, all right? So around about sort of here. So it comes back down to kind of where it was last cycle, or, maybe not as low as that. So down to about 40%, which is about here. So it's not as low, last cycle it was 39%, but it gets to about 40%. Now, 40%, let's have a look at, go back to the total. So 40% of 9.5 trillion is about 3.8 trillion or thereabouts. And I'm doing this math on, off the top of my head. So please forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it's kind of right. So the market cap of Bitcoin, if Bitcoin dominance is at 40%, that means that 40% of the market, the total market, is in Bitcoin. Yeah, that would give Bitcoin a total market cap of about 3.8 trillion. And that is if Bitcoin dominance is at 40%, because that means that 40% of the market is in Bitcoin. Yeah, so that would give a market cap of Bitcoin of about 3.8 trillion. Yeah, so basically the market cap of Bitcoin at the moment is 1.138 trillion or thereabouts. And if you times that by about 3.4, that gives you a market cap of about 3.8 trillion. So essentially what you need to do is times the price essentially by 3.4. So, current price, let's say, I haven't looked at the price of Bitcoin this morning, but current price, say 58,000. So 58,000 times 3.4 is 197. So that would give a price target of Bitcoin of about 197,000 US dollars. And that would be if Bitcoin is capturing 40% of the market cap, or the total market cap of crypto, and the crypto market cap rallies to 9.6 trillion. So it gives you a kind of a, these are all figures, I'm sorry, on the back of a cigarette packet, as it was, so to speak. But it would give you a price target of around about 190 to 200,000 for Bitcoin, which seems, to be honest, about reasonable. So it's been quite a long video. Just to round up now, I've got absolutely no concern at all about Bitcoin at the moment. Maybe we might have a little wick down. It's quite possible. I think the likelihood is we'll probably hold the 50K mark. I'd be surprised if we break down through that, although we might get a little wick there. But we've been consolidating now for a considerable amount of time. And my view is that we are now likely following the 4-year cycle, and therefore, based on the midpoints of each cycle and the fact that Bitcoin generally starts to attack its previous all-time high at the midpoint, I suspect Bitcoin will start to trade around about all-time highs between sort of end of October and December. As for altcoins, everything looks normal to me. It looks like the Bitcoin dominance is now topping out, so the alt season will begin. That might be in a few months, but it will likely be towards the end of Q4, the beginning of Q1. And we seem to be following this 4-year cycle until we're not. So that's the video today. I'll do another video in the next few days or so on the altcoins in particular, but that is my general view at the moment. I'm very bullish on Bitcoin. I think the institutions are now starting to roll in, and I am pretty bullish now for the next year or so. So that's video today. Thanks very much for listening. If you could like and subscribe, that would be great. Also, if you are a trader, as I say, going long or short, please check out the Prime XBT promotion, which the link is in the description. Have a good day, and I shall speak to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.